Hey guys, so this is my first time having a guest on air. This is Justin Derby, and welcome, Justin, to the Green Slug YouTube channel.
It's a pleasure to be here.
So, Justin and I, actually, Justin, tell my viewers what you do. Tell them about your YouTube channel, your website. Tell them about what the type of stuff that you're about and where they can find you.
Well, I am a self taught Christian apologist and young earth creationist. But what separates me from most other young earth creationists is that since I don't have a science background or even a science kind of mind, I rely primarily on the Bible to defend young earth creationism, which, believe it or not, gets old earth creationists and theistic evolutionists really out of whack when you present nothing but the Bible to them.
Hmm.
But as far as where you can find me, I'm on YouTube with the channel TTOR. I'm also on VidMe, same name, TTOR. I started that one about a month ago because of YouTube problems. And if you want to follow my blog, where you can basically find everything about me, you can go to truththeobjectivereality.blogspot.com. There you'll find links to posts, debates I've done, presentations I've done, links to various ministries that I endorse. You can find all kinds of goodies there.
Awesome. And it was actually Cody Leibold that introduced Justin and I. Those of you who saw the previous video I uploaded, that's Cody Leibold. And hopefully I'll be uploading, if this works out well, I'll be bringing guests on this channel more often. Because it's easier to do a video that way, and it's much more fun, I think, to watch two people talking than to have one person doing a monologue. What do you think about that, Justin? Like, do you agree or
Right?
disagree? Or...
It breaks up the monotony. I know I've done about 4 or 5 different podcasts for my own channel, and I had a lot of fun doing each and every one of them. So I think it's great.
Well, that's good to hear. Um,
Yeah.
so, Justin, it sounds like you focus on more, like, whereas I'll get on my YouTube channel, now that you mention it, mine is much more focused on the science than the theology. But I think that's an important breakdown. Like, I see a lot of times where people will say, well, the science says this, and truth can't contradict truth. And they just assume that everything they hear in their high school science class is correct. Whereas a lot of it's not. A lot of it is, even if you believe in evolution, a lot of it is objectively false. Like Haeckel's embryos, like the peppered moths. This stuff's been known to be false for a long time, but it's still still presented as if it were fact, which is extremely misleading. But going beyond that, it's like the average person thinks, well, evolution has been proven scientific fact, and they don't know about the biases. They don't know that um, a lot of proponents of evolution have said, well, we can't allow a divine foot in the door. So they have this bias where it's almost like a wall goes through their brain, and they're not allowed to contradict the Bible of atheism. They're not allowed to contradict the Bible of naturalism. And so they don't realize that, hey, this isn't pure science. This is taking scientific evidence and then interpreting it through a worldview. And then Christians don't know that. They're just like, well, here's what's been proven with science. They think it's absolute fact, and then they say, well, since truth can't contradict truth, they try to then impose that on the Bible. Whereas I think that, like I've talked with a friend of mine who, he'll know who he is. He was in the apologetics group with me when I was in university, and I won't say any names though, but um, he really had to learn that, well, we have to find out, okay, what does science actually say? What can you actually look at and find out with science? And even looking through different worldview glasses, and what does the Bible actually say? So it's like, hey, if the Bible says, well, the Earth is around 6,000 years old, based on the text, and if it says Noah's flood was a global event, then if that's what the Bible objectively says, that it's entirely possible, just from a maybe stepping back from a Christian perspective and saying more of an agnostic perspective, it's entirely possible that the Bible might say one thing and science might say something else. But you can't take this one thing and impose it on the Bible, because that would be a what's the that wouldn't be proper exegesis. That'd be eisegesis. That'd be imposing the text, imposing an outside idea onto the Bible. So, what do you think of that?
Well, William Lane Craig would call that reinterpreting the Bible in light of modern science.
Um,
Which he ironically said we're not supposed to do that, but then he said we have to.
did he? Yeah, I mean, it
Crazy as that.
sounds like.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
William Lane
yes.
Craig, from what I understand, he's an intelligent design advocate for those of you who don't know, but he's a Christian. So my understanding is the intelligent design movement, they will tend to hold to more of an old Earth, but they'll usually stay away from the theology of that. They'll say, well, we have the evidence that God created the universe, but they won't try to um, make the they won't try to make the obvious conflict about the age of the Earth and global flood between an old Earth belief. They won't try to make all that fit together. They'll just say, well, God created the universe, and they'll almost avoid touching the Bible.
Mm-hmm. Or they'll radically reinterpret it like old Earth creationists and theistic evolutionists do.
Mm-hmm.
But
I think it
and
was
that's
I don't want to misquote, but I want to say William Dembski acknowledged that a young Earth creationist view would be the best view to hold to theologically, even though he thinks the science is proven in old Earth.
I think he did say that too. I just don't recall where I read that
Yeah. Well,
or saw it.
I remember. No, I guess moving on to the next topic, if you're ready for that.
Absolutely.
Um, Justin and I were talking about a video where a YouTuber by the name of Professor Stick. So that's a not an actual professor as far as I know. It's just a YouTuber who has a stick figure avatar that explains various concepts to YouTubers. He made a video responding to my video about evolution and gravity. And I'm a little jealous because my video got like 300 views and his got like 30,000. Um, so I'm all for, I'm not gonna get mad about that because I really felt like overall I felt like he gave a pretty fair presentation of my stuff. Like I didn't feel like he quoted me out of context. Um, but it seems like he agreed with everything I said, but still wanted to argue. So he took the premise of the video was that I said it's a fallacy to equate evolution with gravity. So like I can readily see gravity happen. I took a pen, dropped it. I'm not gonna re-demonstrate this. It's so hokey, and I'll openly admit that it's hokey. But it's like you can see an object fall into the ground. You cannot witness microorganisms becoming sentient life over billions of years. And like one of his responses to that was, "Oh well, evolution doesn't say that single-celled organisms will necessarily become sentient." And I'm like, well, no one said that. No one said that it does. Like, no one said that it does. Like, you're imposing a misconception about an evolution onto me that I don't have in my mind, and that I never said on camera. But evolution does claim that over the course of billions of years, single-celled organisms did become all life that we see today.
The paradigm, right?
Yeah. So what would you think? Like I do have some quotes from scientists, but to correct some of the misinformation that Professor Stick had. But what did you think of his video overall?
Well, considering that I did a similar video to you on my channel using a water bottle and my pet dog, I was very interested to see what his response to your video would be. Mine was a bit more humorous, but same principles. But anyway,
They were both terrible videos. I'm gonna say yours. Well, I mean, but I guess we don't have a huge budget. It's like we're
it,
some guys on YouTube, but this is how Steven Crowder started out, and
yeah, yeah. But anyway, when I watched the video, he didn't agree with you on everything, but the things he agreed with you on were fatal to his arguments, especially the parts where he said that, well, it's true that we don't directly observe, evolution in the macro sense or any sense beyond micro happening in action. And Richard
Mhm.
Dawkins has said the same thing too. But that's the death blow for evolution to me, as far as trying to prove that it's science, because
Mhm.
observed happening in action, then you cannot apply the scientific method to it. And when
Yep.
you examine the paradigm of evolution that you've been referring to, the paradigm says that evolution is a process that is so slow in its happening that nobody can live long enough to see it. Not even the pre-flood people in the Bible who are living to be 1,000 years old almost.
Even if
They
you're
couldn't live
Methuselah,
anywhere near long enough.
even if you're Methuselah, to mix different worldviews here, um, yeah, maybe we'll throw in, yeah, to mix up different worldviews here. Even if Methuselah, you're living to almost 1,000 years, you still wouldn't be able to see these sorts of things happening, which really,
Anything beyond micro, yeah.
yeah, which really begs a lot of questions
Go ahead.
about the nature of, whether or not this is science. Because, like, from a scientific perspective, it's like, okay, I can observe a volcano form and I can extrapolate that these other volcanoes, maybe have formed in a similar way. Now, obviously, for the viewers, I do want to, like, put a slight disclaimer out there that um, I don't like the micro versus macro arguments. So obviously, take this with a grain of salt. Justin and I are just using these terms for just for the sake of convenience. Um, we do see, if you read different textbooks, they will give different definitions about microevolution versus macroevolution, and they'll draw that line at a different place. Um, but while we do see macro changes happening, like we do see new species form, it's always due to downward changes. It's not
Micro.
due, yeah, it's not due to the creation of new information. So,
Right.
even though we might call it a macro change, it's always going downhill. So in order for like a bacterium or some kind of prokaryote um, to gradually, become something like a human being over billions of years, they would need to gain new information. And that's actually something that Professor Stick, made a major fallacy on, as he talked about, well, we can observe bacteria becoming resistant to antibiotics.
Still bacteria, baby.
Yeah.
Didn't really
And
change.
they've changed, and it's such a little bit. It's like people don't
Yeah.
realize that the underlying mechanism to that is actually that you have an enzyme, and the gene coding for that enzyme ends up basically breaking, so it's not working properly. So instead of having a properly functioning enzyme that processes the antibiotic, which makes it poisonous, you end up having like a mutant enzyme that comes along and doesn't work right. And so it's like, from a human perspective, it's almost like being born without hands, giving somebody an advantage in some ad hoc environment. Like you can maybe imagine some bizarre situation where being born without hands could be an advantage somehow. Um, and I have no idea how, to be honest. Like maybe handcuffs don't go on you as easily. Um, but basically, that's what's happening inside of the bacteria, is they lost the ability to have a functioning enzyme.
I like the word imagination there, Greg, because apparently that is something we creationists lack. If you've seen the Evolution versus God documentary, Ray Comfort
Oh,
did
I
a few
hated it.
years ago, the
I
one
hated it.
evolutionist professor told him that he just didn't have enough imagination.
Oh my gosh.
Agree.
Oh my gosh. I'm gonna be honest. I hated that documentary. I thought it was the worst documentary.
Not the best,
No,
to say the least.
I thought it was so. I was like, it felt like he's just yelling at people with his microphone, and I'm like, why? I'm like, bring them in. Have a proper Socratic method, where maybe have them sit down with a scientist who's creationist and have them like dialogue a little more. But I felt like it's like, um, so do you think such and such, rawr? Like,
Stick.
like,
Yeah.
and usually college professors aren't like super fast with their responses anyway, because they want to be very precise. But like it wasn't it had its moments in the documentary, but overall, I thought it was terrible.
Yeah, I pretty much would agree with you there. A few moments that were good. The rest of it, well, I think I could have done something a little more interesting on my shoestring budget.
I think we've all got our shoestring budgets, you know. Still got my wrinkly cloth background. I actually have a proper background. I just it's a green screen, and I don't have proper green screen software. Um, and
Right.
yeah, but as a hey, support me on Patreon, and you'll be getting better backgrounds and more videos.
So anyway, let's get back to Professor Stick.
Yeah, that's a good idea. So Professor Stick, like the one of the parts that I really took issue with, like, obviously he didn't understand antibiotic resistance and the underlying mechanisms. So he's on there telling people, oh, well, Green Slug doesn't understand science. I've got 2 science degrees. I understand science just fine. It's like, Professor Stick, have you ever taken a biology class, like beyond high school level? Have you ever, do you have um, any formal training in biology? Um, I mean, if not, then I mean, by all means, you can have your opinion, but according to my professors, I understand biology just fine. According to the two different, according to the 2-year college I started at, I understand biology just fine. According to the 4-year college I went to, I understand biology just fine. So, I mean, it's you saying on one hand that I don't understand biology, and the state of New York's education system, on the other hand, saying that I do. So, but he talked about, I mentioned the general theory of evolution in my video, and it almost seemed
Mhm.
like he didn't understand what that meant. Like he kept insisting, oh, evolution just means change over time. It just means change over time. Clearly, he doesn't know what he's talking about.
Nope.
Because, I mean, you will see that in textbooks where they will define evolution as change over time, but then they'll use it to mean something completely different. And like sometimes, creationists in the past have used the terms like microevolution versus macroevolution, but and evolutionary biologists will use those terms as well. But even evolutionary biologists, such as those who are what they call post neo-Darwinists, will acknowledge, they'll say, well, hey, what you see in microevolution, like these are people who believe that, the whole thing, they believe that, there's no intelligent designer, there is no God, there's no space aliens coming down and, modifying life on Earth. Even they will acknowledge that the difference between microevolution and macroevolution isn't just a difference of adding more time. They will say, well, they think the mechanism for creating a new phyla is different from the mechanism for creating a new species.
Mm, interesting.
Yeah, so even they will acknowledge that the two are very different things, but neo-Darwinists like Richard Dawkins hold to I mean, I guess you could call it the Orthodox view. It's like what they teach in school, but what they teach in school that okay, mutation plus natural selection, creating those small changes, leading up to bigger changes.
Hmm.
I'm not sure how like it's a very simple idea, but I'm not sure there are evolutionary biologists now that hold to such a simplified view of evolution. Like even if you believe in evolution for the sake of argument, I don't think that I don't think there are very many that still hold to that. Like if you actually read their papers, actually read what they talk about, um, they will they'll say, hey, we think there's different mechanisms going on. Um, and the endosymbiotic theory, the idea that your mitochondria and, the larger cell as a whole were once different cells that, became, developed a symbiotic relationship and became one organism. I mean, people laughed at that at first, but now that's pretty much the mainstream view in evolutionary biology.
Hmm. things I wouldn't know because I just sit at home making videos.
Well, I mean, you're.
But what you were
Go for
saying
it.
though earlier when you were questioning how much studying Professor Stick has done,
Hmm.
I would ask an additional question to him on top of the ones you proposed, which is search at all on your own. Because my experience with a lot of people is they believe what they're told, and they
Yeah,
haven't even researched something for themselves in the most basic of ways, much less go through what you're talking
yeah. It's really interesting because so many people they'll read like those kind of overly simplified, you know, biology books, or they'll see something on TV, and so often what you see on like the National Geographic or Discovery Channel is so um off point from what any scientist in the world ever actually says, or what CNN says. But like even like the basic
about.
stuff, they're like, oh well, I read in my biology textbook in high school, the X, Y, and Z is the way things are. And it's like, but then you take freshman biology at your university, or or anywhere, take AP Bio, and what you learn there is totally different from what you learned before. Because like
Yeah.
I had a professor who I did education research with, and she had a phrase that I showed her a video on some molecular thing for a course. Maybe it was about a virus or a protein or something. And she goes, this thing is simplified. Oh no, it wasn't a video. It was a she was talking about textbooks, so she brought it up and she said, this is simplified to the point where it's wrong. And so like she wants to be able to break things down and simplify them, but she said this is simplified to the point where it's wrong. Um, but anyway, going back to Professor Stick, um, he obviously didn't understand what I meant by the general theory of evolution. So what I want to do is read a quote from an evolutionary biologist named Kirkhood. If I'm pronouncing that name right, it's Kerkut. Um, and this is from Implications of Evolution, published by, it looks like Pergamon in Oxford, UK, pages 157, and it's in from the year 1960. Um, so this is older stuff. I'm guessing this is where the phrase general theory of evolution was actually coined, though it could be wrong because I'm not a historian of science. He goes, there is a theory which states that many living animals can be observed over the course of time to undergo changes so that new species are formed. This is called the special theory of evolution and can be demonstrated in certain cases by experiments. On the other hand, there is a theory that all the living forms in the world have arisen from a single source, which itself came from an inorganic form. This theory can be called the general theory of evolution, and the evidence that supports it is not sufficiently strong to allow us to consider it as anything more than a working hypothesis. It is not clear whether the changes that bring about speciation are of the same nature as those that brought about the development of new phyla. The answer will be found in future experimental work and not by the dogmatic assertions that the general theory of evolution must be correct because there is nothing else that will satisfactorily take its place.
How much has changed in 60 years, Greg?
What? Oh, yeah.
Thinking about, how much has changed? How much has changed?
Yeah, that's the thing is like even in the 1960s, like people were told, "Oh, evolution's a proven scientific fact." I have an old book from, I guess I don't have it on my shelf right here, but my dad had a textbook from when he was a kid that he gave me, or maybe I shouldn't call it a textbook, it was a book um, that talked about evolution, and it talked about how, well, the different races of human beings all evolved independently. It was the multi-regional hypothesis or the multi-regional theory. So the idea was that, oh well, people in Africa evolved independently of people in Asia, independently of people in Europe. Now, obviously, they had a common ancestor, but they thought, well, this common ancestor was like a Homo erectus that went back a million years. Um, Now, I might not have those numbers 100% correct there, but it might have been 2 or 3 million, but I want to say it was 1 million years. No one believes that anymore. I mean, this it was amazing because it's being presented as fact. This um, idea that I mean, in the technical sense, was racist. Now, I don't say it was racist
Mm-hmm.
to miss it, but it was like if you the word racism literally means belief in race. So the belief that human beings make up multiple different races, um, and we don't. We're
And
all
some are
one
better than
race.
others. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, even then, even if you believe technically, even if you believe that um, a hum somebody from Africa and somebody from Asia and somebody from Europe are just as smart, but they represent different subspecies, then that would technically be racism. But what we now know from genetics is that if you that the difference between a European and an African is almost non-existent. Like you can have two
Mm-hmm.
people from the same continent and they might be farther apart genetically than, somebody from a different than, this person from Africa and this person from Europe. Like it's really amazing how how little what we call race or your continental origin, has anything to do with genetic diversity. Now, with that, we do know that Africans have more genetic diversity than all those groups put together. Um, However, this is still, in relative terms. Like we're still talking about very little genetic diversity. Like all human beings on Earth are basically clones of one another.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. All the
All those
differences.
differences. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Um, it really is truly amazing because like back in the day, people like you'd go to school and even the textbook that was relevant to the Scopes monkey trial, talked about there being five different races and the white man being the highest race. And you have it where it's like, liberals are like, oh, well, we want to defend, what this guy was doing, and he wanted to have free thinking, but we want to fire any professor who doesn't agree with evolution. Um, but even this book was promoting racism, which I think that today's modern left really is racist. I think they really do look down on, and I mean that more just in the technical sense. I think that modern liberals look down on black people, but they view black people as being like children that they have to take care of.
Same with Muslims.
Oh gosh, yeah. There's a the term. I should bring up the quote from Ayan Hirsi Ali. But she basically said like, hey, you have one standard for the white man and one standard for the black man, or for somebody who's black or brown. And she's like, you know what? That's racism. You are a racist, and you feel good about it too.
Moral
She
standards, right?
and of course you know who Ayan Hirsi Ali is. I'm sure. Do you want to tell that to the viewers?
Mm-hmm. Hmm. But yeah, I hear what you're saying. But in a funny way, it all really does go back to Charles Darwin because the whole point of his theory of evolution and the origin of species was to show that certain races were favored over others.
Not. I wouldn't say that. I
If
would.
you were to go
I would.
by the title, you'd get that.
You would up to no. I would disagree somewhat, but his follow-up book, he did have a follow-up book called The Descent of Man, where he did go into racism a lot more. Where he, explicitly said that, white people are more highly evolved than black people. But he said, it's not necessarily the case that all white people are smarter than all black people. He actually said that, hey, I did meet a black woman who is smarter than most white people, but he thought that on average the white person was going to be smarter than the black person. But his fallacy at the time was that um, he's measuring intellect by the standards of European education, which by that standard at that time, most white people would have had more formal education than most black people. But if you go to Europe, or sorry, if you go to Africa, um, they didn't have, the schools and the universities that people in Europe had. So he wasn't taking into account nature versus nurture. So, Thomas Sowell points out that even in today's ghettos, where racists will point out like, hey, look, it's really sad because you'll have racists saying, well, hey, look, black people in Africa and black people in the ghetto, they're both not successful. And Thomas Sowell pointed out that if you give them school choice, which is something the left is against because, welfare is the new cotton. But if you give people school choice, I'm saying welfare is the new cotton. Thomas Sowell didn't say that. I, I think the left is, very racist, and I know that he pointed out if you get kids who go to charter schools score just as well as families making $200,000 a year in white suburbs. And he said with charter schools, it's not a case of them skimming the cream. They're chosen by lottery. So you have kids in the public school. Sometimes they're in the same buildings. Often they're in the same building. He said first and second floor will be the public school scoring below the 10th percentile. Third floor is the charter school. They're scoring above the 90th percentile. And so it's
Hmm.
I think Charles Darwin in his I don't think his ultimate goal was racism. Like I think that he viewed he viewed black people as being less smart than white people. He definitely viewed that, but his goal wasn't to push them down. He just had a worldview. He had a view of biology that he, viewed like this is just the way the world is. And given an evolutionary view of the world, it's perfectly and where
It
we've
does feel racism, though.
it does. It does. Like even Stephen Jay Gould has said that because of Charles Darwin, like I don't remember the exact quote, but Charles Darwin basically dumped gasoline on the fire. To put,
Hmm.
I hate to put words in a Gould's mouth because I can't remember the exact quote. Oh, I remember it somewhat now. Was that the biological arguments for racism may have been common before Charles Darwin, but they increased by orders of magnitude on the publication of Origin of Species.
Hmm.
Now,
I've
that
read that too.
that might not be a word for word quote, but it's there. And speaking of Gould, I actually have another quote from him. Um, with Professor Stick claiming, "Oh well, you don't understand evolution." He also said, "Well, what about the mountains of evidence for evolution?" And I'm like, "Well, I've made a lot of videos on this, and creationists who are scientists have talked about this." But with Gould, he had this interesting quote. I actually managed to find the long version of it on uh on Goodreads. So he says the extreme rarity of transitional forms in the fossil record persists as a trade secret of paleontology. The evolutionary tree that adorn the evolutionary trees that adorn our textbooks have data only at the tips and nodes of the branches. The rest is inference, however reasonable, not the evidence of fossils. Yet Darwin was so wedded to gradualism that he wagered his entire theory on a denial of this literal record. The geological record is extremely imperfect in this fact. Oh, this is a Gould quoting Darwin. The geological record is extremely imperfect, and this fact will, to a large extent, explain why we do not find inter- interminable varieties connecting together all the extinct and existing forms of life by the finest graduated steps. He who rejects these he who rejects these views on the nature of the geological record will rightly reject my whole theory. So obviously Darwin speaking in 1860s proper gentleman form, Victorian gentleman. But anyway, Gould goes on to say Darwin's argument still persists as the favorite escape of most paleontologists from the embarrassment of a record that seems to show so little of evolution. In exposing its cultural and methodological roots, I wish in no way to impugn the potential validity of gradualism, parentheses, for all general views have similar roots. I wish only to point out that it was never seen in the rocks. Paleontologists have paid an exorbitant price for Darwin's argument. We fancy ourselves as the only true students of life's history. Yet to preserve our favorite account of evolution by natural selection, we view our data as so bad that we never see the very process we profess to study. and this is from Natural History, May 1977. Um, and of course, Gould went on to, was he and another scientist proposed the idea of punctuated equilibrium, which is the idea that
Hmm.
evolution happens slowly and then very rapidly, so that you don't see it in the fossil record.
So, in other words, not having evidence of slow, gradual changes over billions of years
Yeah,
counts as having evidence.
yeah. I mean, that's the thing. Is like in science, we shouldn't generally be using our theory to we shouldn't generally be using. Sorry, I need to check my phone real quick. Um, you if you have a theory, it shouldn't be that you have a theory to explain away the evidence. Like your theory should come from the evidence. So I mean, there's going to be times where it's like, okay, I think A, B, and C favor this hypothesis or favor this theory, but D seems to contradict it. But I think that my theory can still be explained in light of D because then maybe you're explaining away D that way. So I mean, it's it is kind of a slippery slope. It is a you're really trying to explain away the evidence rather than trying to explain the evidence. Now, I'll say
Oh,
in Gould's defense that if you believe in evolution, punctuated equilibrium is hardly unreasonable. Like if you run one of these little video games that simulates evolution, which I don't hold them in any higher regard than a video game. Even though some people think, oh, this computer simulation proved evolution. It's like, no, a computer simulation can't. They can't do that. Like, I feel like that's something people said in the 90s when they didn't really understand how computers work, but I haven't really heard anybody say that lately. Um, but I mean, even with those, you often will see, okay, you have a population of your pretend organisms, and they get to a point where they're kind of at stasis. And then maybe something comes in the environment and changes things, jars it, and then a lot of change happens very quickly. And we also do see this in biology when you introduce an organism to a new environment. The change that does happen can happen very, very quickly. So I think if you believe in evolution, it's not unreasonable. You'd have some punctuated views, but what we see with the fossil record is you see complete birds. Um, Obviously, Archaeopteryx is a strange animal, but all of the like it has complete teeth, complete feathers. It doesn't have half feathers, half scales. It has all the features it has are complete. It doesn't have things that are like
fully
half.
functioning, right?
Yeah, they're fully functioning. They're there. I mean, you can recognize what it is. Um, but see a you don't see these objective transitional forms. And what we do see in the fossil
Uh-huh.
record, evolutionists will say, well, 99.99 whatever percent of species that have ever existed are dead. But that doesn't come from the fossil record. That just comes from your belief in evolution. I mean, almost everything we see in the fossil record, besides dinosaurs and a few other organisms, you can find a similar animal that's alive today. Like you see crocodiles in the fossil record. We see crocodiles today. You see brachiopods in the fossil record, and apparently we do have living examples of brachiopods today. They're not necessarily the same species, though. We see dragonflies in the fossil record. We see dragonflies today, etc. But we're not
Mm-hmm.
seeing like these clear cut objective transitional fossils. Like a friend of mine is actually I don't want to say his name on camera because you know let him. I'll probably promote him later, but he's writing a book right now that is going through all of the supposed ape men. All the supposed examples of ape to human transitions. And it's really interesting because a lot of these fossils are actually you might look and see, well, this one bone here lines up 100% with a bone of some type of ape, versus you might look at a different bone and it lines up exactly with what you'd expect from a human being. So, I mean, and a lot of these fossils are actually found in mixed bone beds. So you're seeing lots and lots of
Mhm.
different bones all mixed in together, and then they're kind of picking and choosing which ones they want for their specimen. And it amazes me, like, okay, even if you believe in evolution, it's like, why are you allowing them to get away with that? And that seems like an obvious thing. So, I guess that comes down to truth. Sorry, I'm actually going to close out Skype entirely. There we go. Um, Here, actually, let's see if I can go into not available. Let's see, Skype, close. No.
Don't
Uh,
worry, folks. This will not make it into the DVD cut.
yeah, well, it might. There we go. This is the problem of going live. So do you have any thoughts on this, like what I just said? Because like as I'm saying this, like I'm seeing like your face light up. Like they almost should have had my words on video and your facial reactions.
Well, that might be the case. I don't know. It just, when I think of everything you say, I think of a video I put together not too long ago
Hmm.
about how ultimately evolutionists teach us to deny what we observe in reality. And I also see from studying people like Ernst Haeckel,
Hmm.
who, when he drawings, he was actually doing something that Charles Darwin himself did with faking pictures of human emotions. There's a spirit behind their worldview that allows them to lie about evidence.
Yeah, that's something that I've always like. If you are confident in your worldview, um, as evolutionists claim to be, then why is it? And I actually plan to make a video about this soon. I want to make um, first time my viewers are hearing about it, but top 10 hoaxes and myths that evolutionists perpetuate. Um, and I want to talk about Haeckel's embryos and peppered moths and a few other things. Um, why do they have to say things like telling people, oh, well, creationists deny that species change over time? I mean, anybody who spends, like Jerry Coyne, did that where he accused, he's the Discovery Institute, the intelligent design group, of denying that species change. And it's like, had he spent as I pointed out over and over again in every video response to Jerry Coyne, had he spent 5 minutes on the Discovery Institute website, he would know that wasn't true. And then Jerry Coyne actually contacted me, and I pointed this out, and he refused to correct the error. So Jerry Coyne knows darn good and well he's, lying through his teeth. He's a close associate of Richard Dawkins. Dawkins said he's the top evolutionary geneticist on the planet. Um, this guy is intentionally lying. Like there's no two ways around it. And I don't mind going on air saying that. He can call my lawyer if he wants to. Um, but why? And I think that's something that like I've start like over the past year, after the 2016 election. I guess transitioning this into kind of a broader subject. Um, I mean, you have people who are accusing Ben Carson of being a white supremacist. Um, like,
Sorry.
my gosh, it's like you know, Ben Carson's about as black as you get. I mean, they just don't like that he's successful. Like, because you're successful, you can no longer be black. I mean, is that the left's view? I mean, how is that not racist? Um, so like I've been learning about like the Socratic method, and I've been learning a little bit more about people's cognitive things. Because somebody, I don't know if you can tell, but like I'm actually on the autism spectrum, so I read
So am I.
recently. Oh, there you go. I read recently, like, small world. I read recently people who are neurotypical think from the top down, generally speaking. So they have like their generalization, and then that generalization overrides the actual data. Whereas people
Mhm.
on the autism spectrum, like they will look obsessively at each piece of data, and then they will come to their conclusion, and then they'll hold to that conclusion. Like I had an aunt recently who accused me of being very rigid, um, which I didn't realize how maybe that was meant to cut a little deeper than I realized at the time. But Temple Grandin, very famous autistic woman, pointed out like, yeah, we'll be very rigid, but it's because we studied very carefully and came to that conclusion through logic.
Yeah, that's pretty much my experience too when I became a young earth creationist. Because a lot of people, when they try to convince old earth creationists, theistic evolutionists, or
Hmm.
atheistic evolutionists that young earth creationism is true, they'll appeal to science.
Yeah.
And the Bible teaches it first. And so I found and understood and have practiced with my ministry is that when you show that the Bible itself teaches a 6,000-year-old earth and universe, it becomes much easier to spot the flaws in other people's arguments when they bring it
Really.
up. And most of the time I've found science is not even the issue to older of creationists. When you start pointing out that the Bible clearly teaches a 6,000-year-old earth and universe, and you have Jesus and God himself
Hmm.
saying things that don't make sense unless young earth creationism is true. When you start pointing that out, you start to see the true nature of older of creationists and theistic evolutionists who claim to adhere to the same Bible we do
Hmm.
until they're presented with the straightforward reading. Then that's when you start seeing them employ radical reinterpretations like, oh, well, when Jesus said in Matthew
Yeah.
19 and male and female are created at the beginning of creation, he didn't really mean that. What he really meant was he made them at the beginning of their creation. Adds words
That doesn't
into
make
the
any
Bible.
sense. That would be a what's it called? A sentence that means nothing. A
Yeah,
tautology.
it's a cop
That's
out.
like saying I
Yeah,
was born at the be that's like saying I was born on my first birth on the day I was born.
right.
Or like I came
It's
out of
just,
my mom the day I was born. It's like, yeah. Or saying, well, this person's a single bachelor. It's like,
mhm.
why would anybody even say, like, it becomes like, well, why would anybody even say something like that? Like, it's a sentence that has no purpose to it. And obviously, Jesus thought it was significant enough to say it, and the apostles thought it was significant enough to commit it to, the expensive paper, which was not cheap back then.
Mhm. Yep. And as much as I love hearing you talk about science, and as much as I love seeing other young Earth creationists giving scientific oriented presentations defending young Earth creationism,
Mhm.
when you start talking to people at the grassroots level, science has very little to do with their worldviews when you get down to it.
I actually had it where I did a Bible study at my church, where I went through Genesis 1 through 11. And I want to do a video series on that where I start with what I call Genesis chapter 0, which is Romans 1 and 2 Peter chapter 3. Sorry, guys, I feel like I'm ruining some of my future projects for my viewers, but it's I like to integrate, like if I'm going through the Bible, I like to integrate, a few scientific facts in there. Like Neanderthals are the biggest, like everybody's been told, oh, well, what are you, a Neanderthal? So it's like, the term Neanderthal is an insult. Um, but Neanderthals were just as sophisticated as anybody else. Like,
Uh-huh.
um, they, I mean, they didn't have iPhones. I'll say that, but
Right.
they're the first people we know of to create synthetic materials. They actually had basically synthetic chemistry, and we cannot replicate the process that they had. We can't figure out how they made the synthetic chemical they made, which was kind of like a putty material. Then we can't figure out how they did it. Like we're able to make it, but not on that scale. We could probably make it on that scale using our technology, but we can't figure out how they did it with their technology. So like from a creationist perspective, like these are people who lived after Babel, and well, aren't these ape-like people? It's like the only the idea that they're ape-like just is because they lived a long time ago. Like, whether you're young Earth, old Earth, whatever, okay, we'll say a long time ago. Might be a difference in an order of magnitude, but like the biggest difference between like a modern human and Neanderthal would be that they had eyebrow ridges here. And if you pay attention, there's actually I've seen some very there are people of European descent who have that feature still today. Um, I've seen some very um, I've seen some very handsome men who have that feature, and so it's like they don't look like they just walked out of a cave, and nobody would think that they were any less intelligent. And Neanderthals, like according to I know Men's Health magazine isn't necessarily the most scientific source in the world, but Men's Health magazine at least claimed that they were just as physically fit as your average modern day Olympic athlete. And I know from more scientific sources that Neanderthal brains, they were just as large, if not larger. And of course, it's not the size of the brain; it's how you use it. So, I mean, is it possible that? I mean, if is it possible they were less intelligent? Maybe. But these are people who practiced religion, or sorry, these people who made musical instruments, practiced religion, and buried their dead. Like they had sophisticated culture. They
Oh,
had a lot of other things too that went above and beyond that. Like I want to say they had homes that had hearths in them, but that might be another group that I'm thinking of. Um, but like these weren't stupid people, and so it's like
clearly.
so when I go through and I have teach about the Bible, like I show like okay, you have Genesis. Here's how it explains what's out there in the world. So that it's not like the Bible is being isolated like
From
a
reality, yeah.
like Lord of the Rings book. It's like, okay, well, you have this out there in the world, and it makes sense if you see it from the Bible's perspective. But anyway, let me turn this conversation back over to you a little bit because it's convention that if you have somebody on your channel, they're the person who gets to talk the most. They're the person being interviewed, and I know that I'm totally reversing that convention by talking more. So, um, tell me some more about your experiences with talking with people. Like, do you think that Christians have a hard time believing what the Bible says, or they'll reinterpret it because of some kind of cognitive thing where they're trying to reconcile two contradictory ideas and they're doing it wrong?
Well, it kind of depends on who they are because some people intentionally do it and some people intentionally deceive and twist and manipulate the scriptures, but other
Hmm.
people don't do it intentionally and they're just really, I guess, for all intents and purposes, regurgitating what they've been taught. So
Hmm.
if they don't know any better, I can't really hold that against them. And that's where you do try to have a nicer approach in dealing with them and their arguments. But there are some cases where the people who you're talking with, they do know better, or at least they should, because they're an authority figure. And yet they still teach the obviously false argument or claim. And I tend to hold leaders to a higher standard, which is why on my channel I have videos debunking arguments made by William Lane Craig, John Lennox, Frank Turek, Mike Lacona, you know, well known and popular because they have such a following and so much influence that they need to be dealt with. Whereas
Intelligent design
someone
ethics.
that I actually have not dealt with any intelligent design advocates. I
Well,
haven't really come
you
across
mentioned like William Lane Craig and a few others just
anything.
now. Unless I heard the names wrong, it sounded like that was a bunch like the intelligent design advocates for the most part.
Well, I mean, I guess they are intelligent design advocates to some extent,
Hmm.
but from my limited knowledge, all I really know is that they claim to believe in the Bible, they claim to follow Jesus, but they advocate billions of years and Big
Hmm.
Bang Theory in the cases of people like William Lane Craig and John Lennox.
Hmm.
Then there's people like Perry Marshall who add evolution on top of
Yeah.
that, or
Is Perry
Francis
Marshall
Crick.
the is Perry Marshall the Evolution 2.0 guy?
Yes, and I did make a video series responding to his arguments on my channel.
Hmm. Yeah, I
And it's
mean
funny
it's like
actually about that because I was going to say he claims to be an engineer,
mhm,
and one of my friends is J.D. Mitchell, the associate, like not the associate, but the head of the Institute for Creation Science. He's a retired engineer, so I thought it would be funny if I gave him Perry's book and said, "Well, you're an engineer or used to be. He's an
Mhm.
engineer. I thought it'd be interesting to see what an engineer thinks of another engineer's arguments. And so about a month later or so, when I meet him again, JD hands me the book back and says he didn't read past the book's introduction because his arguments were so bad.
Oh my gosh, it's so. I mean, all I've seen is like his stuff that comes up in my Facebook feed, and I'm like, it's like evolution's wrong, but it's like, I mean, he has stuff that's like, I guess I'm also like
I'll
a
grab it.
science. Oh, what? Oh,
I got it right here. Actually, there's a quote of his in the beginning I want you
go
to
for it.
read.
Go for it.
You might it might make you laugh. Let's see. Oh no, that's not it. Here's Road to Code. Yeah. He has a section in his intro called Who Should Not Read This Book? And the very first thing he says is, if you're a staunch 6-day creationist, if you hold a firm conviction that the universe is young and no other interpretation of ancient texts is permissible, if evolution seems an impossible hoax, then you will find this book threatening. And you know what? That paragraph I just read had the opposite effect on me. I didn't
Yeah,
know if I should buy this book or not, but as soon as I read that, $1 down.
reverse psychology.
And yeah, he makes other really weird arguments. I mean, if you could just go watch my videos responding to his book, you'll
Are
see me
they Ben
reading from the
Carson?
page.
Are they Ben Carson as a white supremacist weird, or nothing can be that weird? I'm sorry, they can't be that bad.
Just a lot of scripture manipulating when it comes to it, because he promotes day age theory in his book. And he actually, let me turn to that, because he intentionally admits to twisting the scripture to make his interpretation work.
Seriously,
Dude, yeah.
like he came right out and admitted it.
Yeah, because he says here on page 310 of his book in Appendix 2, which is where a lot of his arguments against young earth creationism were found. He says, as we read Genesis together, let's make two assumptions. And assumption number 2 is that the word day in the creation account, when it's preceded by, time of day and numbers,
Mhm.
his second assumption is that the word day refers to a period of time, hours. So before
Gotcha.
he ever goes into the whole model he outlines in this book, he automatically assumes that the word day means a period of time and not a regular, ordinary 24-hour day like today, even though there's days, like times of day and numbers attached to the word day in almost all of their instances.
And you know what? Go even
And so when
further.
you, yeah,
Take it even further. My understanding is that there is not a single world-class expert of Hebrew who takes the day age theory seriously. Like the only like I went to Hugh Ross's website, and the only Hebrew expert they could cite was one guy who has a master's in Hebrew, saying, well, the day it can mean a long period of time. And yes, everybody agrees the word yom can mean a long period of time, but it has only in certain contexts. Its primary meaning is um so it's like if you tell somebody, it's similar to English where it's like if I tell you, well, I'll meet you in 3 days, they don't and they're like, well, where are you? You're like, oh, well, I really meant 3 ages from now. It's like that's somebody you're not going to be friends with anymore. So it's like, and like I'm not going to be friends with that person anymore. It's like forget them. Um, it's like be like, yeah, I think we need to start hanging out with other people. Um, but
right.
the it kind of, I mean, it really pushes a lot of boundaries where I'm like, okay, how, at what point, um, can this is something I've been struggling with for a long time, is understanding why do people think, believe, and say the things that they say. Like I had a different relative who recently told me, like in response to my Bill Nye stuff, she goes, "Well, you don't know what a scientist is." Like I have 2 science degrees. Like this is like telling, and I'm applying to PhD schools right now. this is like telling a medical student that they don't know what a doctor is. And it's like okay, like as I get older, I'll get more of a um more experience in the laboratory, and I'll have more firsthand
Right.
perception of what goes on day to day, like in addition to what I already have. But I mean, you could say that about everybody. It's like telling culinary somebody with their bachelor's in culinary arts they don't know what a chef is. And maybe let me not stop using so many examples. It's so absurd that it's and this is from a relative who actually does have a bachelor's in chemistry. And so it's like, my family might get mad at me for saying this on camera and talking about this stuff, but it's like, if you're going to be so insulting as to tell me like I don't know what a scientist is. And like this isn't, like I said, this is in context of Bill Nye, who doesn't have any science degree, doesn't have any formal scientific training. What he has is he has a bachelor's in mechanical engineering.
Engineering. Yeah.
Yep, mechanical engineering specifically, which means he would have taken some physics during his time in school. So, I mean, he wouldn't be, completely stupid when it comes to, explaining, some applied physics, explaining how a hovercraft works, things like that. Like he'd be very well qualified to explain how a hovercraft works. Um,
Right.
but he's not a scientist. Like, and a scientist and engineer are two different things. Um, and he can have his show, but like when he's going on CNN telling an actual climate scientist that that the climate scientist doesn't know what he's talking about. I mean,
Uh-huh.
it's really the height of arrogance. I mean, it's one thing like it. It's one thing like I've had somebody before who said he had a master's in molecular biology over online. I talked to him for a little bit. This guy did not have this guy has never taken any science courses and any biology courses in his life. And I called him out on it. It was maybe if I can track down the conversation, I'll send it to you. But it was like, I was like, you are lying. Like you do not have this. And he's like, well, how dare you say I don't have this? Like you don't have it. You're lying. And I don't know why he would embarrass himself like this. Like if you don't,
Yeah.
I mean, it's like if you want to be honest and say, well, I trust what the scientific consensus has to say. I mean, if that's where in some things in life you got to do that. But
Yeah,
it's
I
like
can relate. I mean,
go
I'm
for it.
sorry, I cut you off.
Yeah, no,
I
go
was
for
just
it.
gonna say.
I'm pretty much done.
I was just gonna say it's a similar principle I've seen in my own life because you've probably had this before too. You're talking to someone who claims that they know what the Bible teaches and says, and therefore they reject it. But then when you start talking to them about the contents of the Bible, they seem to have it's even in there.
Bible says unicorn. It, yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, it's something where it's like I think Steven Crowder has really influenced me there, where it's like I used to very view atheists as, oh well, you just don't know yet, or well, you've been hurt by the church, and some people have been, but like what people say and what's actually going on are two very different things quite often. Um,
Uh-huh.
like this whole oh well, Muslim terrorists are blowing people up, therefore religion is bad. Like, well, what did Christians do that you find so bad? Oh, the Crusades. It's like that's all that they keep coming out with the
Oh,
Crusades. It's like that and the Inquisition, and they don't know what the Crusades or the
or the
Inquisition.
Orlando or the Orlando nightclub massacre last year, where some people actually blamed Christians for a
Oh,
Muslim
gosh,
jihadi blowing people up,
actually,
killing people.
I'm remembering that now, where they're like, oh well, there's this homophobia and there's this intolerance, and blame the Christians. It's like, it's not our fault. Like we tried to push them back. We tried to stop them from invading the West. So
Even though Sharia law says there's a death penalty to being a homosexual,
yeah,
yeah,
I
just
mean,
ignore that.
it's
Yeah.
it's amazing because it's like and obviously not every single Muslim in the world is bad. We're not see I hate that the left
No,
is well not all Muslims are bad. Well, nobody ever
we
said
know
they were.
that.
We know. I mean, but it's like for crying out loud, I don't know if it's still true, but I remember a few years ago Malaysia had been the only Muslim country in the world to openly and plainly condemn the 9/11 terrorist attacks. Like the other countries would say things like, "Oh, well, we condemn the killing of innocent life." It's like, well, we both know in your theology, the the unbeliever, the non-Muslim is by definition not innocent. I mean, you have the house of peace and the house of war.
Uh-huh.
In Islamic theology,
Uh-huh.
and I'm sure
Very much so.
you're probably quite well read on that, knowing that knowing which apologists you tend to follow.
Yeah, David Wood's pretty knowledgeable on Islam.
David Woods is amazing. Like I mean, and Nabil Qureshi, it's like I guess I try to be honest on my channel where like I don't understand things like I don't understand why God took him home when he did. But I guess
Right.
God is the master and I am the slave. And that doesn't mean that my faith is irrational, but go for it.
Say there is something I've realized recently that Nabil's death has shown me, and it's a good thing. There's a lot of people who have this conception that in order for someone like you and me to do apologetics, we basically have to spend 30, 40 years studying everything. And by the time we're old men, then we'll be qualified to
Hmm.
do apologetics. Meanwhile, while we're doing that, the world goes to hell and all that. But the assumption is that we're going to have all this time to become legitimate apologists. And that didn't happen for Nabil. He's gone in his mid 30s and he made the most of his apologetics knowledge while he was alive.
He,
The way he went shows me that I don't have enough time to dilly
mhm.
dally. I need to get doing stuff now because, for all I know, I could be dead next year or tomorrow. I don't know how long I have left. So Nabil's death has shown me that I can't waste time, with
Yeah.
doing what I do.
Was I the one that told you about that? That pointed that out?
May I think you may have pointed out something about Nabil.
Because I pointed that out to
Had this
somebody maybe,
conversation.
maybe on Messenger like yesterday to somebody that they were saying, well, I want to know my stuff really really well. I'm like, well, think about Nabil Qureshi. I want to say that was you I was talking to, but I'm not sure. Um,
Oh, we didn't have that exact words. You might have been talking to someone else, but we might have talked about it too. But
Gotcha.
yeah, I hear.
It might have
Go
been
ahead with your story.
a different friend. Well, I mean, this is just like if you watch some of my videos, it's like I'll be very open where I really have my doubts is with Matthew 6. God takes care of the birds, takes care of the grass. How much more will he take care of you? And like to me, like it almost seems contradictory because it's like, well, look at the grass with the flowers. Even Solomon wasn't clothed like this. But then how much more will you be clothed? So it's like, okay, you have the grass, you have Solomon, and then I'd be below Solomon, but then somehow I'm above the grass. And so, like, it might be a language thing, like, because, obviously Jesus was speaking in Aramaic. The New Testament was written in Greek, so, I mean, and of course, the writers were fluent in both, so they would understand. But then the Greek to English, it's like
Mm-hmm.
and it's ancient Greek to 21st century English. Like we don't think the same way anymore. We don't think the same way as our great grandfathers. They had to go out on the farm, and I don't know about your family in particular, but most of us don't do that. Because thank God for scientific advancement, thank God for capitalism, that we've been able to develop technology so that most people can pursue careers outside of the farm. Yet we're still, I know that we're still working by the sweat of our brow.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I was going to say, the technology advancements you're referring to allow us to do what we do. 10 years ago, probably, you and I could not have done what we're doing now.
Gosh.
We couldn't have our own little.
2005 is when YouTube came out, and I remember a friend of mine showing me videos of Robot Chicken on YouTube. Um, and it's like, and I was like, I had never heard of YouTube, and like my friend just loved this thing called YouTube, and it's, but then even video chat at like, say 2, 3 years ago wasn't as good quality as what you and I are getting right now.
Yeah. I was just thinking the access we have to information through the internet and sites like YouTube and the technology we have that allows us to create all this content that's semi-professional, professional in nature, even though we're broke.
Yeah.
Or at least I am. I mean, the stuff that we're doing now with technology and apologetics and access to information, you and I could not have done that in the early 2000s like we do today. We couldn't have started online ministries like we do now
Hmm.
back then.
Yeah. And,
I mean, yeah.
and it's such a blessing because it's like for the longest time, like was ordering materials from Answers in Genesis, and I definitely recommend that to people. Like, if you want a good apologetics tool that you can order for your family, get them, maybe for Christmas, get them a subscription to Answers Magazine. Or
Ooh, I got something you should recommend too. My friend JD Mitchell recently this year, he came out with the first ever fossil guidebook written from a young Earth creationist perspective.
nice, nice. Oh, so it's
Yeah,
like,
it's called.
so it's like you go out in the world, you go out and like you're doing your fossil hunting, you're digging up your clams or whatever, and you look them up in the book.
Yeah, so if you find a fossil and you want to identify what it is from the young Earth creationist perspective, bam,
Nice.
no more
Do they
dealing
all,
with the evolutionary worldview.
do they also have the like evolutionary perspective where they're like, oh well, this is a brachiopod, it's found in this layer of rock, and from the evolutionary perspective, it would be, X number million of years old.
Not really.
Okay.
Well, I mean, there's a little bit of talking about the conflict between the evolutionary paradigm and the creationism one, but this is mainly just written from the young Earth creationist perspective.
Gotcha.
Uh, but like, it's a nice little book, and it's colored pages throughout the whole thing, no black and whites,
Nice.
and a
Um,
and a really nice cover. Like he really went to work on this thing. It's pretty good. But yeah,
nice.
I haven't actually read too much of it because I don't really have a fossil kind of mind like he does. And so when I read something like this, it's like, after 2 pages for me.
Yeah. Well, so what was I saying? Oh yeah, that's definitely, a good thing to get for relatives. Answers Magazine, where like if you have somebody who is a fossil hunter, give them that book. Get your kids involved in this
Mhm.
stuff. Um, and like there's so much stuff out there for people. Um, See, I was gonna say something else, but I can't remember what it was. That's okay. I think we should probably wrap up the video. Do you have anything, Justin? Do you have any words of wisdom for the audience? Want to repeat where they can find you?
Hmm. Well, as far as where you
Justin,
can
what
find
is
me,
what do your videos usually focus on? Let's get there. Like your videos, your website. Obviously, you do some creation versus evolution. But being a
that's
fan
not
of
all I do. Yeah.
being a fan of David Woods, I could say you definitely probably do a lot more than that. So
Yeah.
tell the audience more about what you do, and then we'll wrap up the video.
Okay. Well, creationism is the biggest topic on my channel as far as like how many videos I do on a topic. Old Earth creationism, atheism, evolution, young Earth creationism. I do those the most, but I'm not just a one-trick pony, and neither is my friend John Chambers, who's my partner in my YouTube channel, who's made some videos. The topics we cover are, old Earth creationism, theistic evolution, atheism, evolution, young Earth creationism, Islam, King James onlyism. John's starting to cover Mormonism. And I like to teach basic Bible doctrine because what good is teaching apologetics if you can't teach the Bible?
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
And
what
I've
are you
talked about
defending
the
at that
yeah.
point? It's like saying I'm going to defend England, but you can't find England on a map.
Yeah.
You're going to
So we
shoot the
do a
wrong direction.
lot of different topics, as you can see. But I do focus the most on creation evolution because that's what controls our academic culture today. And according to the USA Today this summer, if you accept evolution in billions of years into the biblical worldview, well, then you should be willing to compromise on Black Lives Matter movement, homosexual marriage, abortion, social justice warriors. Name the social issue that's controversial. Christians should concede to all of it if they accept evolution in billions of years.
And people will. I
But
mean,
that's
the door will
yeah,
be open. Sorry, keep going.
yeah. But that's I guess that's the word of wisdom as far as
The USA
why
Today
I do the topics that I do.
also talked about how you know AR-15s are bad because you can attach a chainsaw bayonet to them.
I read
Like,
that or saw that too.
I had to go. I actually went to the USA Twitter account. I was like, I was like, are you kidding me? Went to the USA Twitter account, played the video for myself, paused it, took a screenshot, put that screenshot up on my website. So I mean, it really does amaze me. It's like you have like the CNN admitting that they made up the whole Trump Russia thing. Like, oh, it's their nothing burger. Um, and you have USA Today doing this. You have liberals and leftists talking about like, oh, we should ban semi-automatic guns. Like, do you every gun's a semi-automatic, except for like muskets and shotguns. Like even your handgun's a semi-automatic. They don't even know what these terms mean. They just think, oh, semi-automatic means scary gun.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, obviously not to get too off in the woods of the gun issues, but it's like people
The,
want to just talk and not know what they're talking about.
the
It's like
logic is
there's a verse in Proverbs.
yeah. I was just gonna say the
There's a verse in
logic is
Proverbs.
really bad. Yeah. Sorry, I interrupted you.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead.
There's a
Talk about Proverbs.
Yeah, there's a verse in Proverbs that says, a fool does not care about understanding, but only in airing his own opinion. And it's probably in chapter 18, but I'm not sure what chapter it's in. People can Google it. It comes up pretty quickly. Um,
Man,
yeah,
you could
but anyway,
you could yeah.
what?
I was just gonna say you could take that verse you just referred to and put it over the pictures of all kinds of people, and that would make a good meme.
Oh my god!
It
Oh my god!
would make perfect sense.
It totally would. Um, oh my gosh! Anyway, you and we've gotta do this again sometime. Um, you know, definitely. Everybody go check out Justin's channel. Um, and
I'm pretty sure the links will be in the description box, right?
yeah, links will be in the description box. He'll have stuff up there for you, and um, yeah. So everybody, I guess this is Justin and Greg out.
Have fun, everybody.